If you feel even more comfortable, feel free to drop your LinkedIn profile so people can network with you and we can build a stronger community of people who are interested in organizational digital strategy. We're really excited to get started shortly. We're just going to let a few more people filter in. We're going to have a great conversation today about the 3 pillars of organizational digital strategy. And welcome to everybody who has already joined us. Welcome, Rebecca. Welcome, Jessica. Welcome, Katie, Sarah, Fatima, Frerick. We're so excited to have you here. Welcome, Lisa. It's going to be a great discussion today. And again, for those of you who are kind of just filtering in or joining us, we are dropping in our names, our location, and our organization. If we feel like it and we feel comfortable, we're dropping in our pronouns and our LinkedIn as well, so we can all get to know each other, get connected, and have great enduring conversations about the questions of organizational digital strategy.
Cool. Yeah, thank you, everyone. We're going to go ahead and just jump right in. We have a lot to cover today. And thanks for bearing with us, those of you. Technology glitches. We were both in the webinar, and it looked like the webinar was streaming. And then it seemed like some folks could hear us, but then no one could actually hear and see us. So let's go ahead and kick it off. I'm going to bring up the little pointer, the highlighter, just for whatever reason that helped turn on the laser pointer. So welcome in. Today we are talking about the 3 pillars of organizational digital strategy. This is a concept I started talking about a couple of years ago, and I'll kind of a preview of the to come is it's, to me, it's been a really big part of thinking organizationally, how people think, and kind of reworking this finally into a presentation for folks. So I've been talking to folks about it. I've included a slide across a number of places, but Sarah and I are working on the digital campaign accelerator. And so this was a really great chance to formalize this and then use it to share with folks ahead of time. So those of you that don't know me, I am Brad Caldana, wrote the digital plan and then founded the Center for Digital Strategy. I've been working in this space. It is crazy, over 15 years now. I used to say over a decade, and now it's over 15 years, which is interesting. I've seen a lot of versions of the internet, and I'm not even sure which version that we're on right now. Like, people call it like Web 3.0, but I'm like, is it? I mean, because we're all using different versions of the internet, actually, also. But so I host a number of trainings, summits, and conferences via the Center for Digital Strategy throughout the year, and really excited to be talking here today with my good friend, Sarah Ali. And Sarah, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Ali. I am the founder of Sarah Ali Digital. I am also a digital strategist at a Canadian mental health charity. I'm located in Toronto, Ontario. I have been in the space a little bit for not as long as Brad, for about 10 years now. My expertise lies in comprehensive organizational digital strategy, building campaigns from the ground up, whether those be fundraising, marketing, advocacy, and alongside Brad and the Center for Digital Strategy, I will be helping deliver the Digital Campaign Accelerator starting October 3rd, and we'll tell you a little bit more about that as this webinar goes on. Thanks, Brad.
Awesome. So the 3 pillars, I'll back up one piece here. So kind of how I approach this thinking is that, and kind of how I came to this, right, is a little bit of, and we'll talk about through this a little bit too, is I kind of consistently keep seeing what I would call bad strategy or lack thereof inside of organizations, and realizing that people would have one piece and then not the other pieces, right? And so that, like, something was misfiring. And so really thinking about these 3 pillars of strategy, capacity, and infrastructure as the 3 things you need to run a really great digital strategy inside of your organization, right? Like, you can do things without all 3 of these working. You can send emails. You can even be amazing on social, but that doesn't add up to an organizational digital strategy, right? And so what we're going to do today is walk through these digital strategies and talk about the elements that build them up, and a little bit of what happens when they're missing. And so let's jump into the first one, which is strategy. Of course, you cannot have organizational level digital strategy without having it. And while I feel like that could sound redundant, right? It's not. So digital strategy aligns your tactics, capacity, and infrastructure to your larger organizational and specific digital campaign goals. And one piece that I mean about that, I talk about goals a lot, and in the planning documents we do, and in the other things we talk about, is I always talk about like, and I got this from a really great executive director that I worked with named Lindsay Allen, of, are the things we are doing, do they add up to the change we want in the world, right? And so always holding the like change you want in the world as part of those goals, right? Like, because you can get lots of clicks on things and you can get lots of views, but if it's not the thing that actually helps create the change in the world that you want, then you're not really doing the thing, are we? And so do they add up to that? And do the things that we're doing advance the digital campaign goals that advance our goals in the world, right? And so really trying to make sure we're adding those two things up, because you can run through a lot of tactics without actually building these things. So the 3 keys to an actual strategy: invest in professional development. So I'm gonna, we're actually gonna break each of these down as we go through. So number 1, those invest in professional development. Your senior staff, the folks who don't work in digital day to day, your digital and communications folks, and then kind of everyone in the org who's kind of working on something should have some digital first professional development. And then invest in outside support, bring in the strategy that you need. And then lastly, in the 3rd key to this is internal understanding. Who has the experience to actually deliver the strategy? And obviously that ties into professional development, right? Like if they don't have it, then they need to get it, because if not, you're in a downward cycle and not a positive upward cycle where you're actually building and scaling. And of course, this is amazing. I may flip back to the Canva slides. I didn't notice this stuff had spun when we moved the Canva into Google Slides. So you'll have to forgive me. Let's look at the next slide. Yeah, they look crazy. So let's just pop open Canva real quick, and that'll make this look better. And I'll be honest, my let's just sign in real quick. My preference for Google Slides over Canva is the pointer. I really like the pointer in there. It helps me present. So I'm going to talk through this a little bit as Canva is loading in the bathroom.
In the background, that's so funny.
It is not loading in the bathroom. I hope or it has become, it does have an AI. It's maybe becoming sentient. So invest in professional development. Like the one thing I was thinking was like strategy doesn't just happen. And one of the professional development pieces, well, let's just say, is a process that develops, right? So when you're thinking about professional development, it's a process, right? So, and innovation is a key part of digital strategy. One of the things I have seen happen when organizations don't invest in professional development and folks aren't that senior themselves in digital, is that someone can execute and run tactics, right? Like they can send email, they can, help you do the kind of basic things. But the truth is digital is still super iterative. I was talking with someone recently on a podcast, and we talked about like digital strategy was like weirdly stable, almost sedate into 2020. There was like 5 years where like, oh, things in Facebook and Twitter were like pretty consistent. You could kind of get pretty consistent outcomes from them. We had kind of moved into the responsive design, and like everyone knew they needed to have a responsive website, and email statistics kind of were staying pretty stable, right? And then like 2020 plus ISO, like all these things just blew up everything, and social media has imploded. And though there were still people doing creative tactics that were pushing the boundary. And so, I think there were some people who were working in the era though, were like, oh yeah, you just kind of need to like hit run repeat on this stuff without innovating. And like, sure, you can do that, but like really right now, if you stayed in hit run repeat from 2020 to 2023, you're spending a lot of time on platforms where you're probably not getting returns. You're like, your email program is probably on a downward spiral and not an upward spiral, right? And so those kind of really interesting things. And so one of the pieces in here, the top component of this is senior staff in the organization. They need, and so if you're coming in and you're an ED, I'm so glad you're here. And if you're coming in and your ED is not here, please try to find ways to get them into conversations like this, because senior leadership have the ability to start and stop digital projects, right? And who gets hired, who thinks about them. And so if they don't understand digital themselves, which I still think is like 90 to 95% of folks in leadership at organizations, then they're going to have, and you'll see as we go through this, they have the ability to start and stop things in pretty negative ways, right? And one of the things I've seen is like, because they don't understand digital and they've not invested in their digital department, they don't think they'll ever get those returns, right? And so if they don't understand and they're not investing in their staff and their staff's professional development, the organization's going to kind of keep digital as like that other thing that would be nice to have. And so,
Yeah,
Sarah, I'll pass it over to you. Yeah.
thank you, Brad. And one thing to note is that, these days there are a number of trainings that are available specifically for executive leadership. So I'm thinking particularly of a training that we run here at the Center for Digital Strategy, which is specifically tailored to exec directors, to board leadership, to the people who are writing the budget lines that you have to get buy-in for, to push organizational change, to push for an ad buy, and to push for the tools and training that you need to advance your organizational skills. And so, keeping that in mind, there's almost this need to manage up to a certain extent. There's a need to kind of approach your senior leadership with these opportunities and show them by way of the kinds of case studies that we see coming out of, if you're a fundraiser, coming out of, Blackbaud, coming out of Next After, showing the value of a real organizational digital strategy. And if you're on the campaign side, there's a number of great resources that can show what does an increased conversion rate for a petition mean for your program. And it really goes back to what Brad said about goals. There's almost 3 levels of goals here. There's your organizational strategy and its goals, and the desire to meet your mission and make the impact that your organization exists to do. Then there are the goals of your digital programs. So those could be your fundraising programs, your marketing programs, or your campaigns and advocacy programs. And then there are the goals for your specific campaign. And so if you are able to append metrics to show what investing in professional development for senior staff might look like, tied to those goals and tied to the KPIs that you've appended to those goals, you're more likely to manage up and get the buy-in you need to get your senior staff to, for example, a one-day training on organizational digital strategy or AI, if that's something you're looking to implement in your organization.
Cool. And so now we're streaming, and it looks like it's supposed to look here. And so the drivers of your digital strategy. So the people who are the managers, often your digital directors, your communication directors, your program managers, them getting the professional development they need, right? And so because digital's never done, if we're not out there in spaces learning from other people, and I think it's like it's fine. Like to some degree, you should have internal muscle memory where you do click, run, repeat on some stuff. And sometimes you even find strategies from someone else and you click, run their strategy, right? Like you're like, great, I am going to use that strategy. And that's the whole idea behind professional development and learning. And then I'm going to talk about the doers, and then I'm going to, Sarah, and let you jump back in and talk about both of those together, because to me, they kind of go hand in hand. Is like investing in professional development for the doers. I guess one thing I'll also say about the managers is I think, except for when I see organizations bring in someone from outside of an organization for a digital leadership role, when it's internal, they're typically moving over from being a email program manager, a web production manager, a social media manager, right? And while there's nothing wrong with that, these are wildly different disciplines. Like it's one of the things I always talk about, like when like digital strategy 101, like we have put together like 10 different disciplines that you normally get a 4-year degree in each of them, and we've called them one department. And then we expect some people to understand all of it, right? And that's not realistic. So people really need to go through this stuff, and they need to be able to get that kind of real professional development. And so then the direct staff working on things digital, right? There's a good chance they are really running a small chunk, right? They are doing digital organizing, they are doing analytics, they are doing, and obviously the smaller the org, the more hats you have to wear, entirely unreasonably. Let's just remember, it's entirely unreasonable that you would be a pro at 10 wildly different disciplines. But thinking about investing in those folks, both as in like, oh, how will they be better if they understand how more of the elements of digital work together? And if they become your next, manager of a team or your digital director, investing in them early makes a big difference, right? Like we'll talk about that in Burnout. And so Sarah, I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key here for your managers and your direct staff is exactly what Brad said, and those that these are the folks who are going to be doing the direct day-to-day planning and the execution. And so ensuring that they have the capacity and the skills to make that happen is really crucial. Like so many of our organizations are stuck in keeping the lights on, whether that means posting every day to social media, but not having that linked to an organizational goal, or not having that linked to lead gen, or not having that linked to fundraising or advocacy goals, and not knowing or not being able to kind of take that step back and say, what exactly are the digital things that we're doing for our organization and for our overall organizational digital strategy. So investing in their growth through trainings, through workshops. I'm thinking, I know that we have the social media summit at the Center for Digital Strategy coming up this week. These are the types of sessions, summits, and workshops that you can send your staff to ensure that they have the skills that they need to execute on good digital strategies.
All right. Invest in outside support. So I think sometimes, strategy doesn't just happen, right? We can only develop so much in-house, and innovation is hard to push past groupthink. And what I mean by that is, especially if you are not in a leadership team role, right? Like I think there are few organizations where someone in the digital role sits at the senior leadership table, right? Like that is developing, that is happening. A lot of times I see still digital is under comms, and your senior leader person for you is a comms person, and they're still thinking comms first and not digital first, which is a really different thing. And so I do think we need to bring in outside help to expand these things. And I think it can be easy to feel like it is a failure of your organization that you're bringing in outside consultants. And I would encourage everyone, and those of us working in digital, to feel like, oh, this is a benefit. We are expanding what we do. It is not a negative to what we've done. It is an expansion of what we do, right? And so the thing about the big side of it is like agencies coming in and helping you run a full project, right? Like if your organization is spinning up something new, and I had this one time when I was working on a project and kind of said to someone, I was like, and this was someone else working through a website redesign. I was like, look, they're like, yeah, maybe we'll just do it all in-house. And I had been through that. And I was like, look, doing a redesign of your website is a massive project. And so you need to pick organizationally, are you going to rebuild your website, or are you going to run your campaigns? Because your campaigns aren't stopping. And so expecting that your staff could somehow divert 20 to 75% of their time to go work on the website redesign while all of the other work that the absurd amount of work they're already expected to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so again, we'll come back to the burnout side eventually, but those things. So and Sarah, I'm just going to bop through these real quick, just keep an eye on time, and then I'll flip it back to you. So
Totally.
to specific consultants, bringing in consultants who have strategic experience, right? So sometimes you don't need a whole agency. Sometimes you just need a consultant who's coming in to help you plan out your end of year giving, or you're launching a new strategic campaign, or you're going to start working with influencers, and someone who can just kind of help you think through that process, lay out the process, infuse you with more strategy, right? And then the contractors, the folks who are doing and executing, right? And that's kind of how I separate a consultant from a contractor. And obviously they're both on contract, and they could do a little bit of both, but this might be someone more who's like coming in just to help you do expanded graphic design, right? But they're actually bringing in strategy. They're bringing in their knowledge of that niche thing, right? They're helping you execute on a video, or maybe they're coming in, you're hiring just a contractor to do some overhauls of your website, and it's not a complete thing, and it's not an agency. And so, that's kind of that quick breakdown. Sarah, kick it over to you.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add here, but just to kind of really double down on the fact that hiring outside support, and especially if you're able to get the budget for your outside support, that is not a failure of your own capacity or capabilities as a digital team member or a digital manager. Really, it's just an opportunity to expand what you have the capacity to do. And sometimes because, consultants or contractors have access to so many different organizations, they can bring in a best practice that you may not have a familiarity with, because they have the chance to embed with so many different teams across your sector or across different sectors.
Yeah, that's a big piece not to miss there, right? Is that that wide experience. Thank you for remembering that point. And then internal understanding, flex your internal power, professional development ROI, get a return on the professional development, right? Like have folks in-house, create a culture of trust and testing, right? So what I mean by that is creating a culture of trusting that your internal team can help lead on strategy, maybe even folks who don't have the director title or manager title, that they are bringing in strategy and knowledge of their own. And digital requires testing, and testing will fail. That's why we call it testing, so that we can test to see what will or won't work, right? And the nonprofit industrial complex, if you don't know the website Nonprofit as Fuck, Nonprofit AF, they're on Facebook and they do some other stuff, and they talk a lot about, the thing I'm always concerned about too is that, this kind of zero-sum nature that the nonprofit world has gotten into, and it's also been driven by funders that like, oh, if everything you do isn't a success, then you as an organization are somehow a failure. And like, oh, well, that doesn't lead to innovation, right? Like that leads to a downward spiral in an evolving world. And so, if you're in a leadership position, and there's kind of two parts here, right? Is like, if you're in the head of the organization, right, like you have to be able to create a culture of trust and testing where people can know that they can try out things to figure out if it will work and help impact your goals, and that it may not work, right? That it may not all work. And then if you're in the manager space, you're going to have to figure out how to manage up on that and help folks understand that. And then, so where this internal thing lines up is strategy leaders inside of the organization need to be able to lead, right? So need to be put in a space where they can use their strategy. And I'm sure some of you, if you're a digital director now and you're still feeling like the senior leadership above you doesn't get it, yeah, it can feel like banging your head against a wall, right? You're like, here is how we move forward, or here are the investments we would need. And someone says, no, just do better, right? And you're like, that's not how that works. Insights, listening to folks in niche roles, right? So to me, it's also like one of the things that's super important is early on in any sort of digital campaign I'm thinking about, and then this leads to your bigger digital strategy as well, is that listen to your internal person who does design, listen to your person who does video, bring them in early so they can help you craft strategy around what it is that you're working on, and then scaling the strategy across the teams. And I'm not sure if we just lost Sarah. Sarah, are you still there?
I
Okay,
am.
you're just
I'm
off
so
video.
sorry. For some reason, no, my video, I think, just turned itself off. But I'm just managing the chat while you're chatting.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Cool. I was going to pass it over to you.
Yeah, there was something in the chat that I just wanted to quickly speak to, which was that it can be really hard to explain to executives the need to bring in outside support, especially when you are stuck just keeping the lights on, managing your own team. And so that's really where data-backed trends, including your own data, really come in. So if you are able to do an audit of your own digital platforms, pull out what your email KPIs are looking like, your social KPIs are looking like, your web traffic and your web KPIs, and then compare that against industry standards or industry benchmarks. So I was just about to pull up the M&R benchmarks report and drop that into the chat. That's a really great place to benchmark yourself against. If you can show, okay, this is where we're at, and this is where the sector is at, and we don't have the time or capacity to get ourselves there without outside support, oftentimes senior leadership will buy in. And it really comes down to your ability to tell a data story, to show the numbers and tell the story of where we are now and where we want to be. And I've found in my experience as a consultant, coming into organizations and helping mid-level managers, approach and manage senior leadership, manage up with senior leadership, that has been the most effective methodology. So I can think, for example, of one project that I ran with a national federated healthcare charity here in Canada, wherein we built using Google Data Studio a dashboard of the organization's programmatic goals. So they had goals around people, for example, using their resources, but they didn't have any data around how many people are actually downloading a resource or a fact sheet or what have you. So in Google Data Studio, we built an analytics dashboard that showed, okay, this is how many people are coming to the website, and this is how many people are actually getting to, a resource, and this is how many people are able to download it. And that gave this like stark view to leadership that their programmatic goals, their large top level mission, which was to share information about their specific health issue, wasn't being met. And so I and the mid-level management we're able to then say, okay, by investing in channels and in tools and tech and professional development that will drive traffic to the site and emphasize the value proposition of these specific resources, we can meet our top level organizational mission. And that's what goes back to exactly what Brad said, which is your organizational goals and how that builds into this organizational strategy and getting that buy-in.
Absolutely. Capacity, pillar number 2. The digital capacity is the human ability to deliver on your organization's digital strategy, both internal and external capacity, right? And so the 3 keys here: develop a system that retains good staff, mentor good staff, build human-based systems, and internal knowledge. So let's break these down. Number 1, retain good staff. This is super hard to do. Number 1, we need to fight the burnout cycle. Number 2, realistic expectations from leadership, which impacts number 1. Number 3, balance sprints and maintenance. And so what do I mean by, like, number 1, I think any of us working in digital know that like burnout is a plague across, I think, anyone working in digital for social impact, whether you're doing political stuff, labor, pure charity stuff. Most people are being asked to do too much with too little. And then people, and that's, kind of the last section, like, why are we not getting the returns? We're going, well, because you're not, you're asking for too much. So realistic strategy expectations from leadership. So 1, that culture set by senior staff, right? So this is a complicated balance here, right? You need to get them the strategy so that they understand what is possible and realistic with the capacity and infrastructure we have, which we're going to keep talking through. Human-centered managers, so managers who think about this. One of the things that I started talking about when I was a direct digital director was real human hours. And I would ask someone, how many real human hours will that thing take you, right? Like, not a rough thing, but like, and some of it is like, oh, you were going to load these PDFs. Well, how many real human hours might that take you to do this very task-based thing? And they're like, oh yeah, it's probably like 10 hours, like, or, till you break it down, you're like, oh, this person who has more senior skills is sitting there doing this very rote thing. And could I find a contractor who wouldn't mind watching Netflix and uploading these, right? Like, because like there are tasks that we all do, right? That we're like, you could be doing something else while you're doing this very menial, like, it's like, copying, pasting things out of spreadsheets, right? And so human-centered managers who are thinking about this, thinking about the real pieces of it, and that goes on with the balance sprints and maintenance. I think a lot of times in digital, we are helping launch a campaign, launch a new website, run end of year. And so I think it's really talking internally also about how do we balance that out for humans, right? So like one of the things I did when I was in leadership was around end of year. And thankfully I was in an organization that talked about this as well, of like flex time and makeup hours, right? And so it's like, oh, you had to work when other people were off. Why don't you take, you need to take those days off, right? And like at the very least take those days off, and like we'll balance this out, right? So like you should pretty much not be working that first week of January. You can do this report in a week. Like nothing changes if you do this report a week later on end of year giving, right? And so, and similar stuff, right? You're launching a new website. And so like, how does this impact the people that were leading and like their, the way they focus on those things? So Sarah?
Yeah, no, I think exactly what you said. We know that burnout is real. It's a pervasive issue in all of our organizations. And I think a real key here is to chat about sprints and maintenance with management and with senior staff, letting them know that there will be times, there'll be periods of time in which we are pedal to the metal grind. So in the lead up to year end, for example, just like Brad said. And then in post-campaign reporting, we're going to slow down and we're going to prioritize our health and ensure that this is a long-term investment in our organization and in our people.
So build human-based systems, kind of started talking about this the last one, but right size the work, right? So making sure folks don't have an unrealistic amount on their plate, bringing in bring digital into roles beyond traditional digital. And I don't, some organizations are still like, oh, everyone should be doing digital, and so we don't need a digital department. And I firmly believe that it's untrue because of these really niche, specialized roles that digital has. And like, sometimes I'm like, okay, well, who like actually manages your like email list and hygiene? And then the answer becomes no one, right? And like, who is thinking about web infrastructure for you? And the answer is typically no one, right? Like, but should some roles be kind of decamped and put into other places, or should people kind of be on both teams, which is a system I've worked in, and I really love that, where people kind of, maybe they're in an org chart, they're there and kind of here, right? And then align our values and goals, right? So if we are, as an organization, asking people to work a disproportionate amount of time or pushing them to work in a way that is unrealistic, that probably doesn't align with the ethos of the organization as well, right? And so really making sure we're aligning to those things. And one of the struggles I've seen is people moving from a role that is not digital management. So you haven't been a digital director, maybe you haven't even managed a complete digital project, you've been doing a piece of it, and then them getting pushed down unrealistic expectations, right, from leadership above them, and then they not understanding what goes into the roles below them, right? And so it's important to listen and lead, right? And then you need your senior level staff to listen and lead, right? Like, so they need to be able to listen first before they can help you lead on digital. Building these human-based systems for managers is what is actually going to help your program scale, right? You actually can't scale if you don't have the right people in capacity, right? And then, the direct staff, giving them space to share about how this is all impacting them. So Sarah, pass it back to you.
No, nothing to add here. And just in the interest of time, I think it makes sense to keep moving, but I just, I think everything that you've said there is really important.
Thanks. Internal knowledge, experience is necessary. We need to mentor through the gaps, right? So people won't have all the knowledge, as I keep saying, balance inside and outside support. So one, senior staff need to build their knowledge and strategy, kind of going back to the strategy section. Two, giving managers the space to lead. And both for the external, and then looking for external folks to come in for support and mentoring, right? So your agency folks, your consultants. I myself, often when I work with organizations and clients, like I always say, like, my goal is to like leave this organization better and to leave people with the knowledge to do the thing we're talking about, right? Like, I'm not here just to kind of give you some ideas. I'm here to actually help you kind of move your, completely forward. Sarah?
Yeah, no, I think the key here again is to recognize that there's like, in order to meet our organizational goals, that mentorship is going to be a really key piece. And, I don't mean to keep beating a dead horse, but I think a lot of us really do focus on managing up. And so sometimes mentorship doesn't look traditional. Sometimes that mentorship is, looking at what are the ways in which I can convey to senior leadership or to my boss or to my boss's boss the value and importance of investing in digital, whether that be, mentorship coming in externally. So having, bringing in a vendor, bringing in a contractor, bringing in a consultant, and making sure they have the opportunity to do stakeholder interviews with senior leadership and get them to, and really prep them and say, this, member of our leadership team doesn't really understand digital. So there's a little bit about, there's a little bit here about giving them the chance to ask those questions and to kind of lead leadership into understanding the digital strategy and the digital needs. And I just want to address Rebecca's point, because I think that's really, really important. In terms of like flatter staff structure, and there's also a question in Q&A, Rebecca, that we've seen as well. And so we're going to make some time to chat about that as well, where we need to distribute digital knowledge, again, through that professional development. Looking at benchmarks and data is a big piece. It's kind of hard to deny facts or deny data when it's in front of you. But we'll do a slightly deeper dive on the increasing internal understanding of digital tactics and strategy, especially for on-the-ground staff.
Yeah, so lastly, infrastructure. Infrastructure is the channels, tools, and ability to reach audiences we need to bring our strategy to life with our capacity. So the 3 keys: assess your infrastructure, align to goals and roadmaps to future. So this is one clearly that builds on itself. And so assessing your structure. So this is here where I'll break down what do I mean by infrastructure, because it is not, I think, traditionally how people use infrastructure. And I've kind of come to realize that these actually are, interestingly, pieces of infrastructure in a digital world, right? And so the kind of one we think of first is our CRM, our tools, and our applications, right? Like, how do we send email? How do we send our SMS? How do we manage our social media? But then there actually are channels to reach our audiences. And so this is where digital becomes different. And so this is also our social media, our YouTube, and social media doesn't do enough to describe all of the places where we're meeting people, right? Because YouTube and like Twitch streams are like social media hybrids, and maybe they are just social media, right? Like maybe it's like the main content there is a video that may be streaming, and then we're building community there. And lastly, our audience and our supporters, right? And so this is also a different think about this, is like the size of your active email list is a piece of your infrastructure, right? It is a piece of your ability to deliver on the work that you do, right? And so breaking this down in 3 ways that are really important to think of. So owned, I don't know what the word "on" is, but direct contact. So this is, I think of your owned infrastructure as the places where you own your ability to contact someone: email, SMS, website, and then especially if your website has a like logged in community component, that's like even better. Loaned. So this is a new term I've come up with in a way of thinking about this, is social media platforms are parts of your infrastructure, but they're only loaned to you. And you don't know when someone's going to take away that loan, right? Like a couple years ago, Facebook pages, you could really reach people, right? And it was easy to reach people without doing paid ads. Right now, for a Facebook page, outside of those few that were juggernauts before, you really can't reach people without doing ads. And if those of you remember Facebook Messenger, right, like they were like, build up your messenger list, this will be an awesome way to reach people. And then they were like, oh, well, now you have to pay us to use that. And then they were like, yeah, we're just going to take that tool away. I mean, you can still use it, but it's now just one-to-one. There's no broadcast, right? And so, and then lastly, shared. The shared infrastructure is your partners, right? And so that can be their email list, their SMS, right? Like, and some of us over time, you can build such a strong relationship that you can kind of count on, oh, well, we know when they share our petition, we are going to get X amount of a boost. Or now in Web 5X 3.0, the world of creators and influencers. And I think those of you who are not deeply in this, maybe come to the social summit tomorrow, where we'll talk about creators. And influencers are a real thing, but B, there's this whole big class of creators who have their own niche audiences that are reaching people in really interesting ways. And so they can become part of the shared infrastructure. And maybe you're still sharing loaned infrastructure, but when you're building a 3 or 6 month campaign, you probably have benchmarks that you can count on, right? And so thinking about them that way. Sarah?
Yeah, I think this is a helpful framework. Also recognizing that, platforms are not, we're not always going to, or may not always be there. When Facebook often changes its rules, people get their pages taken away, people's platforms get completely shut down. So really doubling down on your owned and shared, and including in shared your PR strategy and your media strategy, recognizing that earned media is an incredibly useful way to drive traffic to your owned properties, so to your website, and making sure that, and then there's one thing that I've noticed time and time again with PR teams at, charities or social impact organizations, is that people are not including in their news releases the programmatic, the thing that is going to meet your programmatic goals. So for example, you have some big exciting thing happening and you're generating buzz online and you've got a lead gen associated with that, whether that's like a petition or a hand raiser. Not including that in your news release means that you are not going to meet that goal. If you're getting featured and I'm based in Toronto, so if you're getting featured in Toronto Star or on that website, you want to make sure that they're driving traffic to the thing that meets your programmatic goals.
Yeah. So aligning to your goals, right? So strategy is the key to aligning our infrastructure to our goals, blending in the internal and external knowledge, and then refining our expectations, right? So the who should be aligning our infrastructure to our goals, our leaders, the how are the managers, the folks who are really making this happen, and scaling, getting in the external support to scale, right? So, I think, as we said, there's a lot you can do on your own. There's a lot where you might need external learning to bring that in. And I think for most organizations that I've seen, there's still a huge potential for scaling in digital. And, I think, digital transformation and digital scaling sound like buzzwords, and but they actually mean real things. And I think most organizations still have a ton of room to scale their reach and impact, and though probably in different places, right? Like a lot of organizations were trying to scale their Facebook reach because it totally made sense up to 3 years ago. And like if you're still doing that via traditional pages, yeah, that's that. So Sarah, I'll pass it back to you. Every once in a while my eyes catch the chat there.
Yeah, it can be hard to be, I'm trying to monitor the chat for us, so appreciate that. No, nothing to add on this. I really do keep focusing on aligning to your goals, because I think that's really that's one of the biggest pieces of making sure that your digital strategy is not just doing digital things or having digital tools or posting on digital platforms or generating buzz or whatever it is that our organizations kind of think that they should be doing, because for example, leadership says, oh, everyone I know is on social media, we should be on social media, and so then some intern or some low-level staff ends up posting something every day, and it's great, like it's not bad content, and in fact a lot of these kind of junior staff members are great content creators, but if it's not aligned to our goals, it's not useful and we shouldn't be doing it.
Absolutely. And then roadmap to the future. So honestly, audit the current, what you're doing, assess your ability to impact, align the audits to the goals, right? And so like what I mean by that, right? And I think there's so many ways to do audits, but I think the human hours have to come into it at this point, right? And so there's a good chance your organization is probably, or maybe not, but your organization is still pouring a lot of capacity into Facebook and Twitter/X, and all of your engagement there has been dwindling. It may be time to scale back, right? And you might say, well, if we scale back, it'll decrease even further. And that's a question, right? Like, well, is what's happening there leading to any of our goals, right? Like, are we able to map this to our goals, build our future infrastructure with strategy? And to say, like, if you are continuing to see engagement in Facebook, maybe you actually need to add to your capacity there, right? Like if you're one of those outliers, maybe your organization has a number of Facebook groups that like really boost the page, and then this beautiful virtuous cycle that many of us encouraged people to build 3 and 5 years ago, and those that did are like still getting engagement. And so again, building these roadmaps to the future, for senior staff, encouraging them to listen and then lead, right? So listen to what the managers have to say, listen to what this external support has to say to help bring in that real strategy, map it to your infrastructure, and start building this towards the new future, whatever that is for your organization, right? Like it could be, well, we're going to start investing more in story. We're going to make a pivot into video because we know that's where social media has been going and is like just continue to go further. And so just really thinking about different elements like that.
Yeah, I want to say here that audits are your secret weapon, really. And if you're not someone who's done an audit of your channels or digital audit before, you can hit up either myself or Brad. I have some templates of how do you do a web content audit, how do you do a social audit, and I know Brad has a number of them as well. But really, an audit will reveal the data that you need to then get your senior staff to buy in, to then hire whoever you need, invest in the professional development that we've mentioned, and then build that roadmap for the future, aligning everything at every step of the way with your goals, your organizational goals, and then your program, so your communications or your marketing or your advocacy or your fundraising goals.
Yeah. So infusing the strategy. So we've got the 3 pillars. Organizational digital strategy needs to be approached along all the paths and the keys, right? And so this segues to the Accelerator, this great program that Sarah and I are running together. And so let's just pop this up and talk about this real quick. Sarah, are you seeing that on the shared screen right now?
Yep, it's that.
Beautiful. It laid itself out in a way I've never seen before. Internet is crazy. So somehow moving into the other screen got rid of the menu bar. I don't know if the menu bar disappeared for you, but it's gone on my screen. It's like, oh, this is a beautiful way to look at a layout. So anyways, the Digital Campaign Accelerator, I am super excited about what we have to offer here and what we're talking about. And I'll just give you a little bit of the genesis that's not here on this is I was working with an organization a couple of years ago that was just really crushing it in social media. And I was thinking about running a social media cohort and I asked them, like, what would be helpful for you? And they're like, oh, running social media campaigns. I'm like, wait, you all are great on social media. And they're like, yeah. And I was like, oh, but you're good at one-off, aren't you? They're like, yep, we are good at like knee-jerk reactions, but we don't have a sustained message. We don't run actual campaigns. And I was like, oh, yeah, let's talk about that. And what I've realized then over the years is a lot of folks, including myself, equip people with a lot of different tactics and strategies. And rarely are we teaching people how to run it as a coherent campaign, right? And so I think that's super important. And, when I wrote the book, The Digital Plan, right, it was about a framework for really kind of organizational digital strategy, right? Like thinking about it in kind of big terms. And that's still different than like, how do you run and execute a campaign? So really excited. Sarah and I have been building this together. We start with how to build digital strategy. So let's see here. Some of you will be well primed for part of day 1, where we talk about the 3 pillars of digital strategy, strategy, capacity, and infrastructure. And you'll come in and you'll even be able to share some thoughts, right? Hopefully now you like go back and you look at this and like, oh yeah, here's how I need to think about some of these things inside of what we're doing. How do we target? How do we reach folks? So targets and tactics. This is super important. This actually like aligns to the infrastructure and strategy piece of it, right? Like, if you need to figure out who you're trying to target and move in the world and engage and influence, and then you need to figure out, do we have the infrastructure and capacity to reach these people, right? Communications and narrative strategy. I love talking about storytelling. I think when I talk about like places organizations can scale and do more, storytelling, so much storytelling, creating content to engage folks. And so this is a super important part of running a digital campaign, is actually thinking about how story is going to be part of that, right? Because it's not just a series of tactics, right? It should be moving people through a flow of engagement throughout that. And then we're going to talk about creative and logistics. Again, another weird pronunciation there, logistics, how digital organizing and creativity align in your digital campaign. We're also going to talk about budgets, right? Like how do you think through budgets? So budgets kind of go back into the infrastructure piece of it, right? Like you want to do this thing in the world where you actually have to create a real budget to get there. And then campaign evaluation support. Again, one of the things, I always include this in those of you that know the digital plan. I can't believe I don't have a big logo. I am such a like logo guy. But if those of you who don't know, the logo is the digital engagement cycle. So I kind of, the digital engagement cycle was a thing I saw happening, but not like concretely. So created that when we created the digital plan, and then led to the book. And the final piece of that is the feedback, right? So how do we do feedback? And so we're going to get meta, right? And not on Facebook, but meta actual, where we'll talk about how do you run feedback on your own campaign. And then we'll also give you feedback on building a digital strategy plan together for campaigns. So are there any pieces you want to add in here on this like big picture?
No, I think just like the piece to keep in mind, so it is a sliding scale. So, tickets or, seats for this digital campaign accelerator, it is for a team. So it is better that you bring more than one member of your team. And so that kind of goes back to that first pillar, investing in professional development. It's a sliding scale for tickets. So, organizations that have a smaller operating budget will, be charged less or like a lesser amount for, their seats. And organizations with a higher operating budget, obviously, will be asked to give to a little bit more, basically to subsidize and support smaller orgs to send people, just to make sure that, we are distributing this knowledge and this information amongst, all of us who need it. In our last 5 minutes, Brad, I'm wondering if you can speak to the question in the Q&A. I know you've worked with a lot of organizations who have a lot of field organizers and kind of offline organizing being their number one methodology. How do you increase that internal understanding of the roles of digital tactics and strategies when you have like a predominantly offline team? Oh, Brad, did we lose you? No, he's there.
No. Sorry, I was rereading that and I was thinking that, that is not easy when you're a one-person digital organizing team, right? Like I think like full stop, that's not easy, right? If you've got a lot of folks out there in the field doing work, and the yes and part of it is a little bit of the structures piece, right? Like and this is a multi-part thought, but like one of the things I've seen over the years is, and this is like a modification of kind of what I've thought before, but like, is like a lot of times we're asking them to source photos and stories, right? And, I don't know how big your field is. Is it 10 people or is it 100 people? But even like 10 people, when I've been working in places with like 10 people in the field, I've worked in places where I actually helped an organization, which kind of sounds like yours was a fairly flat organization. I was helping them do some digital, and they had someone kind of help execute the emails. I was there to kind of help them just piece it together a little bit. And they asked everyone for photos. It was like a metric and a goal for them to like help source those things. And I do think there's an element there now in hindsight of possibly like making that a goal for everyone initially, and then stop asking the people who always take bad photos, and like no matter how much training you give them, because it's actually not a good use of anyone's time, right? Because you have to look at them, you have to review them, and like how do we actually find the stellar people to kind of engage in those things? And I don't know if this is really getting your question, but like how do we upskill them? I think it's going to take external support. I think you're going to have to look for a Sarah or an I, someone who's willing to come in and talk to your organization. And there are other great folks who do this sort of stuff. My good friend Salim Sharif, similar to I, he changed his last name recently, and so just getting used to him taking the other family name. Salim does a lot on digital organizing and digital storytelling, and like how do you build out scale across a team. And some of it's also, right, it's giving them the strategy of the value add, right? And doing like what's realistic for them, right? Like someone had said a while ago, like, oh well, all organizing is digital now, and like some of it's not, right? Like sitting in a church or a mosque or a synagogue, building community and like working on community issues is not the same as building out an online petition, right? And these things can go hand in hand, but like some people's roles are very augmented by digital, right? Like the petitions make their lives better, the ability to tell people stories at scale make their lives better, but a lot of their work is still, sometimes pen and paper, right? And so thinking about how do we appropriately line our expectations also with folks, right? And so this is not a thing I think that there's no one size fits all, unfortunately, right? Like that's also the strategy and external support stuff. And like it only took, going back to that slide, this stuff doesn't happen overnight. And I'll stay on if there's some other questions too. I don't have a hard stop. I love talking about this. And Sarah, if you do, feel free to jump off. But there's no one size fits all. And it takes time, right? Like I would not have given you that same advice to like, not everyone has to take photos, right? 5 years ago. And now I'm like, oh, that's not a great use of your time. And they're like beautiful tools now that I wish existed before, but now they do. One is they're going to be speaking, and their sponsor of tomorrow's social summit is Gather Voices. That
Yes.
does these beautiful video prompts that allow you to grab. And the great thing too is like a field organizer can actually use that, right? Like they can also use it in the field and help someone gather videos that way. So yeah. And then I'm just going to read out this question here, unless you want to read it out, Sarah, if you want to jump in on it.
Before you do that, I just wanted to jump on this digital organizing versus ground organizing question. So my background before I really got into digital was as a ground organizer. So really as a canvasser and a door knocker. And I was of the opinion that digital was not it. And that the real work happens on the ground in the face-to-face, one-on-one relationships that we build, especially, for example, in like a tenant fight or a migrant worker justice fight, or any other, campaign that requires you to build real relationships. And the way that I was swayed as an organizer to respect and understand the need for digital is recommending exactly what Brad said, that digital is just an additional touch point that allows you to continue to engage with people at scale. So if you have field organizers that are, opening up conversations, opening up doors, building relationships, having digital tools that then remarket them, for example, on social media, so that you stay top of mind, so that your contact who, you haven't had, the field organizer doesn't have time to go meet them this week or next week because capacity is low, is still thinking about the relationship and the conversation because they're getting an ad or they've been asked to follow on social media and they have an opportunity to keep in touch. Another thing that is incredibly effective for offline organizing are things like WhatsApp groups. And you can send your social media post through your WhatsApp group and get those people to repost it. And so it's this integration with digital tactics that scales and deepens the relationships that our offline organizers and our field organizers are already building. And it's that recognition that the most integrated approach or the most integrated campaign is the one that's going to win, because that's the one that is going to engage people at a deeper and deeper level at every moment. And that is the one that is going to scale to reach more and more people. And that is the one that is going to allow your field organizers to do what they do best, which is open doors, chat with people, build relationships, and strengthen and be the backbone of your campaigns. With that, Brad, I think it's just in the respect of everyone's time, it probably makes sense for us to close off. Everyone, thank you so much for attending. Thank you for your insightful questions. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at the chat, a lot of people put their names and their organizations, and feel free to connect with each other, connect with us on LinkedIn. You have my booking link in those templates. And then Brad also has a number of templates, so we can send those out to folks who request them, after the webinar. So thank you, folks. Really, really appreciate your time. Really appreciate you coming to this. Brad, do you have anything to add to help close us off?
No, just thank you, everyone. And please reach out about the Campaign Accelerator. There are also scholarships, right? If you're looking at the price point and that feels hard for your organization, the scale and the price is like folks at big orgs are paying true price, and we're trying to scale it down. So I really want to get the strategy out to everyone, right? Like those who know why I've built the Center for Digital Strategy is like, I just want organizations to help scale in their digital space. And so just reach out. We want to make sure that you're able to join. We want to help impact the work that you're doing. We're trying to scale our knowledge to scale your knowledge to have a better impact in the world. So hope to see you there. And then hope to see some of you at the Social Media Summit tomorrow as well. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, folks. Enjoy the rest of your day.